Hello, my name is David Stokes and I'm a Principal Consultant with Convalido Consulting. In this video I'm going to show you the basics of the new Convalido Data Lifecycle Modeling tool and specifically the shapes that we've created to help model data lifecycles and associated risks. The first thing that you'll need to do is to download a couple of files from the Convalido website. The first of those is a report definition file, which we'll talk more about in a later video. But most importantly is the Visio stencil, which contains all of the shapes and stencils that we've created for the data lifecycle modeling. If I just double click on that, or you can open it directly in Visio. Now we've developed this using Visio Professional 2016. We've not tested it with anything else, but it should work with other versions of Visio 2016 and probably certainly Visio 2013 as well. But again, we haven't tested that, but feel free to give it a go. When you first open the stencil, you'll be on page 1, which is a blank diagram. Page 1 can be duplicated as much as you like. It can be used to create additional diagrams in the same file. Typically, we may have multiple items of data that we wish to model, and you can just copy this page as often as you like. There's also a page which provides an example diagram. This diagram also has data associated with each of the data operation shapes. We'll look at those in more detail in a subsequent video. And finally, we have a background file which provides the background to all of the diagrams you choose to create. Now, we've not locked this down in any way at all. The stencil is set up as a default to use A4 size paper. But if you want to use larger sizes such as A3 to model data's life cycles, that's fine. Or if you want to change it to 8.5 by 11, that's great. You can also turn off the use of the background. That's also perfectly acceptable. We've tried to make this as flexible as possible. The only thing we would ask you to do though is to include this statement in the diagrams that you create, just acknowledging that the shapes and the methodology is based upon the intellectual property of Convalido. Apart from that, you're perfectly free to create your own backgrounds, to edit for your use in your own organisation and so on. So if we go back to page 1, first thing we should probably do is give our diagram a name. Not the most original, but there we go. Down at the bottom left, there are, as default, 4 text fields which you can fill in to give your drawing a title. Give it an ID, version number and date. If you wish to add additional details there, then obviously you're perfectly free to edit the Visio stencil for your own use. Again, nothing's locked down there. At this stage, what I'd normally recommend is that you actually save the document as a Visio diagram rather than a stencil. So if you save as, and rather than Visio stencil, select Visio drawing and give it a file name. I won't actually bother to do that, but typically give it a file name. That will save you overwriting the stencil and also mean if you're using the auto save feature, the chances of you actually losing a diagram when you're working on it are minimised. Over to the left, you can see the shapes area. This is really where we start to move away from standard Visio. We've created 37 custom shapes organised on 8 different stencils, plus there's an additional stencil you can see here for data flow connectors. These are based upon the standard Visio connectors, which you may already be familiar with, but we've just changed them to give a start and an end point to show it's a data flow diagram. So as we said, there are 8 standard stencils. There's one for data acquisition, one for data entry, one for data storage, one for data editing, and so on. Data processing, copying, data delete, and data move. Now most of these stencils have 4 shapes on them, and I'll just use the data acquisition to show you how these shapes are organised. So the first shape I've just dragged and dropped here has a single circle with a single border. That tells me, because I understand how the diagrams work, that a single circle tells me it's a single item of data. a single border tells me there's no metadata associated with that data acquisition operation. If I was acquiring multiple items of data with no metadata, I'd use this shape here. Again, this has 3 circles instead of 1 to just show that there's more than one data item being acquired. But again, single border, that means that there's no metadata being acquired. If we were acquiring metadata for a single item, you can see here we now have a double border. So an example there might be if we're acquiring a temperature measurement from a process control system, the metadata associated with that temperature might be the units of measure, it might be the instrument tag number. And again, we've got a version here where we're acquiring multiple items of data with metadata. So we have the flexibility as we produce our data flow diagram to be very specific. And one of the key points to make here is we're only recommending the use of this detailed data modeling tool for high risk data. This is not something that you would want to use on a very broad basis to model all data for all systems. So we very much are recommending that this tool is used to provide detailed data modeling for high risk data. So each of these stencils, the data entry, data editing, processing, copying and so on, have the same 4 basic shapes. The one that's different is data storage. That has 2 sets of those 4 shapes. The first one is for temporary data storage and the second set is for permanent data storage. And the difference you can see, temporary data storage has a dotted border, it's transient by nature, but the permanent data storage option has a thicker border. That's specifically to draw our attention to it because it's the permanent storage of data that's the most critical and where we have our highest data integrity risks. So again, we have those 4 options. So here is permanent storage of multiple items of data with metadata, but also at the bottom we have a specific shape to differentiate between data storage and an electronic record. There are of course additional controls that apply to electronic records, so we've differentiated an electronic record from general data so that we can clearly see where data is part of an electronic record. So that concludes the introduction to the basic shapes. In the next video we'll actually look at how we construct these diagrams and how we annotate each of the shapes with the data that supports the risk assessment. Look forward to joining you then.